This story is based on historical events and real people who fought at Gettysburg on July 3, 1863. The details, dialogue, and action are drawn from first-hand accounts, official reports, and diary entries compiled by historian Timothy J. Orr in his meticulously researched article called "Sharpshooters Made a Grand Record This Day." That article serves as the inspiration for this historical fiction adaptation. A link to the article is in the description to this video. Every named character in the story actually existed. From Corporal Eugene Kelleran of the 20th Maine to Lieutenant Luke Bicknell of the 1st Massachusetts Sharpshooters, and from Confederate Major Eugene Blackford to Private Eli Willard of Vermont, each man's experience is drawn directly from the historical record. No fictional names have been added. The narrative has been dramatized to give voice to what these men likely saw, thought, and felt in the midst of deadly combat. All dialogue is imagined but grounded in authentic documentation, including letters, reports, and memoirs. Tactical movements, battlefield geography, and weapon details remain faithful to the source material. This story does not attempt to romanticize war. It strips away the banners and bayonets often associated with Gettysburg and instead focuses on the hidden war, the shadow conflict of sharpshooters and skirmishers. These men fought not in grand lines but alone or in pairs, with every shot fired at a specific man, not a distant mass. It was a different kind of courage and a different kind of killing. This story is told to honor their role, which history has too often overlooked. Chapter 1. Shadows over Big Round Top. The sun had not yet cleared the haze when Corporal Eugene Kelleran of the 20th Maine crouched low behind a fallen oak near the summit of Big Round Top. The morning mist clung to the trees, curling around trunks and limbs like smoke. Every branch seemed to whisper death. He pulled his blue wool coat tighter and scanned the dense timber for movement. All was still. Then a single shot cracked through the air. Somewhere in the trees, a Confederate rifleman had taken his position early. Kelleran saw no smoke, no movement, but the sound had come from his right. He kept his musket aimed along the ridge, waiting. To his left, Adjutant Samuel Goodman of the 28th Pennsylvania was already returning fire. His rifle barked, sharp and deliberate. Unlike the wild volleys of line battle, these shots were measured. Every bullet had a name. Between the lines, the sharpshooters had begun their deadly business. Across the way, hidden among the rocks and timber, Confederate Major Eugene Blackford directed his men in silence. His orders were given with hand signals and nods. The sharpshooters under his command, many from Alabama, had spent the dark hours moving into position along the rugged slopes. Some took cover behind stumps. Others climbed into trees. They knew the Union line was close, just beyond the crest, a breath too loud, a silhouette against the morning light, and a man could die without warning. On the Union side, a soldier named Henry Brown shifted his weight and drew in a slow breath. He was part of the skirmish line from Stuart's brigade, which had been thrown back the day before. Now he fought alone, trading shots with men he could not see. Trees splintered, leaves shook. Now and then, a shape would dart between boulders and vanish. Farther up the hill, a Confederate rifleman had taken the bold step of climbing into a large oak. From his perch, he could see clear over the Union lines. But his movement had not gone unnoticed. A sharp-eyed soldier from the Bucktails had spotted him. A single shot brought the sniper crashing down through the branches. His body landed hard on the rocks below, bent awkwardly into the crevice of a stone. Captain Emil Koenig of the 58th New York pressed his men forward a few yards. He did not yell. Yelling was foolish here. The goal was to outthink, outweight, and outshoot. Some of his skirmishers advanced through the underbrush, staying low, keeping their eyes sharp. Others held back, rifles trained on trees and stumps and shadowy crags. Goodman spotted movement near a cluster of broken fence posts. He steadied his aim, fired, then quickly dropped to one knee to reload. No time to check the result. It was shoot, reload, shoot again. The fighting on Culp's Hill that morning was not the grand spectacle of bayonet charges or cannon blasts. It was a duel of patience and precision. Every man knew that somewhere in the trees someone was aiming at him, and so he crept, crawled, and fired at flickers of movement. A glove, a belt buckle, a puff of smoke, that was all. By mid-morning the air was thick with powder. The sun had burned away the fog, revealing the tangle of brush and broken trees that lay between the lines. Bodies from the previous day still lay where they had fallen, but no one paused to mourn. The living had work to do. In the tangled woods below the hill, Blackford's men continued to harass the Union line. His best shots, veterans of Sharpsburg and Fredericksburg, took aim at officers and artillerymen. They were not here to waste powder on privates. Each bullet was meant to change the course of the day. Private Brown rolled behind a boulder and checked his ammunition. Half gone already. He took a swig from his canteen and rubbed dirt across his face to dull the shine of sweat. Then he rose, aimed, and fired again. Back on the Union side, Corporal Kelleran adjusted his position and listened. The sound of battle was steady now, a rifle every few seconds, no more. This was not chaos. It was a rhythm, a heartbeat of hidden war. He had fired 3 times since dawn and seen no target clearly. Yet he knew he was not alone. The trees were full of eyes. By noon, the skirmishers would pull back for water and resupply, but for now, they stayed low, each man alone with his weapon and his thoughts. It was a war of nerves and skill, and it had only just begun. Chapter 2. Crossfire on Cemetery Hill. Captain George Benson Fox of the 75th Ohio stood behind a waist-high stone wall, his hat pulled low, his shoulders hunched. His men crouched beside him, wedged into the broken line of the 11th Corps atop Cemetery Hill. It was just after sunrise, but already the bullets had begun to hiss. Somewhere in the streets of Gettysburg below, Confederate sharpshooters were firing from houses, barns, and church steeples. Every shot seemed to come from a different direction. The enemy had turned the town into a hive of hidden guns. Fox ducked instinctively as a ball smacked into the stone just above his head, showering him with chips. He did not flinch. He had stopped reacting hours ago. Instead, he watched, waited, and listened. The rhythm of this new kind of battle was nothing like line fighting. There were no drums, no shouted orders, only the steady, patient crack of rifles, spaced seconds apart. To the right, Captain Emil Koenig of the 58th New York was in much the same position. His German-American soldiers, mostly from New York City, were furious. The men of the 11th Corps had been mocked after the first day's retreat. Now they were pinned down again, taking fire from snipers hiding behind curtains and shutters. Every movement above the wall drew fire. The Confederates had seized homes along the eastern edge of town and had turned them into fortresses. Koenig saw a glint of sunlight flash from a second-story window. He lifted his rifle, steadied it, and fired. A pause followed. Then another shot came from a rooftop to the left. The exchange was endless. Down the line, Adjutant Samuel Goodman and Private Henry Brown of the 28th Pennsylvania were trying to draw fire so others could locate the shooters. They would stand just enough to make a silhouette, then drop as a comrade raised his rifle. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it did not. Fox turned to a young private next to him. The boy looked pale, his musket gripped tight, his knuckles white. Fox said nothing. There was nothing to say. Any noise might give away their position. The boy had to learn the same way the rest had, by surviving. A bullet whined past, inches above the stone. It had come from a distant attic window. The shooter was likely alone, calm, watching. A Confederate sharpshooter might fire only a dozen times in a morning, but each shot was carefully chosen. Officers, signalmen, artillery crews, the goal was not volume, it was effect. From a basement window across the town square, Major Eugene Blackford watched through the sights of his Whitworth rifle. He rested the long barrel on the windowsill, breathed in slowly, and waited for movement along the Union wall. He was 22 years old and had already seen more battles than most men twice his age. He disliked the slaughter, but he believed in his duty. Blackford's men were scattered through the town. They had orders to target Union officers and anyone giving orders. He had trained them to think independently, to shoot and move, to never stay in one place too long. They fired from closets, haylofts, even storm cellars. On Cemetery Hill, the Union men had begun to respond. Small squads were dispatched across the open fields and flanked the buildings. The task was dangerous. Koenig sent 2 men forward under cover of smoke. One never returned. The other reached a fence line and fired into a row of windows before ducking into a barn. Captain Fox watched a man go down with a shot to the side. He cursed under his breath. The wounded man crawled backward, dragging himself behind the wall. Fox grabbed his collar and pulled him in. The smell of black powder hung in the air. The cries of civilians could still be heard drifting up from town. Many had taken refuge in basements. Some had fled into the countryside. A few watched from behind cellar doors, trembling. By mid-morning, the Union line on Cemetery Hill was bruised and battered, but it held. The sharpshooters had not broken their will. They had, however, left a trail of dead and wounded that told of the hidden war now raging across the town. The Union soldiers did not speak of glory or flags. They spoke of chimneys, porches, and shutters. They spoke of the glint of brass buttons in an attic, of smoke from a side alley, of movement in the shadows. This was not the thunder of Pickett's charge. This was something else, cold, silent, precise, and it was only growing worse. Chapter 3. The Killing Fields, Emmitsburg Road and Bliss Farm. Captain Isaac Scheimer of the 126th New York was among the first to step into the wheat. The tall stalks swayed gently, hiding the movement of men advancing toward the Emmitsburg Road. The morning sun glinted off bayonets, but Scheimer had no interest in close combat. He was leading a skirmish line, sent to flush out Confederate riflemen entrenched along the fence lines and in the outbuildings that dotted the rolling fields. His boots crunched softly on dry soil. Around him, soldiers moved low, crouching, rifles at the ready. Somewhere ahead, the enemy was watching. A single shot rang out. Scheimer stumbled. He fell with no cry. The bullet had entered his face and taken his life before he hit the earth. The line hesitated. Then it kept moving. There was no time to mourn, no safety to stop. Every second in that field was a gamble. To their left, the 1st Massachusetts Sharpshooters under Lieutenant Luke Bicknell moved in pairs. Bicknell had hand-picked these men. They carried long-barreled target rifles and knew how to use them, but even skill could not shield them from exhaustion. Each step brought them closer to the Bliss Farm, a cluster of buildings that had changed hands more than once during the battle. Confederates had fortified it, using it as a forward firing point to harass Union troops on Cemetery Ridge. It was a thorn in the side of the Union line, and today the thorn would be torn out. Chaplain Henry Stevens of the 14th Connecticut stood behind the line, clutching his Bible, watching his men advance toward the farm. The house and barn stood silent for now, but Stevens knew what waited inside. His men did too. Sergeant Elnathan Tyler led the charge. They stormed the barn, bayonets fixed, but found it empty. Smoke and ash clung to the walls. Confederate sharpshooters had already withdrawn. Tyler gave the order to torch it. Flames curled upward as dry hay caught fire. The thick smoke drew attention from Confederate gunners, who opened fire from the far tree line. Shells burst in the air above the 14th. Corporal Samuel Huxham was hit by a rifle shot as he stepped from the barn. He crumpled instantly. His death was quiet, barely noticed amid the roar of artillery and the snapping fire from unseen rifles. Bicknell's sharpshooters dropped flat as the cannon roared. Then they rose, one at a time, and returned fire toward the tree line. Bicknell himself crawled to a fence post, steadied his rifle, and took aim at a Confederate muzzle flash. The Bliss Farm buildings were burned to deny further cover to the enemy. The farm, once a family's home, was now a smoldering ruin surrounded by bodies. As the day wore on, skirmishers were rotated out. New lines came forward. Men who had spent hours under fire were relieved, only to collapse in the rear with trembling hands and hollow eyes. Major Theodore Ellis, watching from a rise, took note of how quickly the ranks were thinning. He had seen more casualties today from sharpshooter fire than in the mass charges of the day before. The enemy was not wasting ammunition. They were choosing targets carefully. The Confederates behind the Emmitsburg Road fence held fast. Their sharpshooters made each Union advance a brutal test. Men fell without warning. A flash, a crack, and another body in the wheat. Near sunset, General Alexander Hayes arrived to oversee the battered line. He saw the smoldering remains of the Bliss Farm, the bloody stretch of field leading up to it, and the rows of men hunkered behind fences. "This is no battlefield," he said quietly to an aide. "It's a butcher's path." But his men did not break. They loaded, fired, ducked, and rose again. Some cried out for water. Others prayed. A few cursed the invisible enemy. And through it all, the crack of rifles continued, steady as a drumbeat, echoing over the wheat and smoke. By nightfall, the Emmitsburg Road had not moved, but neither had the will of the men behind it. Chapter 4, Devils in the Den. At first light, a faint breeze stirred the scorched grass between the round tops and the rocky tangle called Devil's Den. The land lay quiet, but every soldier on the line knew the silence was false. Somewhere in that jumble of granite and shadow, Confederate sharpshooters waited. Colonel Joseph Fisher's men, the Pennsylvania Reserves, had taken up position in the saddle between Big Round Top and Little Round Top. They had worked through the night, stacking stones into low walls, dragging branches into place, preparing for a fight they could not see. From the cleft of Devil's Den, the enemy opened fire. Bullets sang over the heads of the Pennsylvanians. Some struck low into the stone walls, others hit high into the trees. Fisher's men returned fire, but they could not spot the shooters. Sergeant Major P. Morrison of the 9th Reserves watched as a tree branch snapped just above his cap. He ducked lower, cursing softly. The Confederates had found good ground. They were not alone. High in the woods of Rose Hill, members of the 3rd Georgia Sharpshooters had climbed into trees, wedged themselves behind rocks, and fixed their sights on anything that moved. Captain Evan Woodward of the 2nd Pennsylvania Reserves had seen this before. He gathered a few of his men, gave quick instructions, and moved into the woods. Their job was simple. Find the sharpshooters, kill them. They split into pairs. One man would draw fire, the other would flank and shoot. It was a dangerous game, but it worked. In one tree, a Confederate sniper had built a nest of branches and brush. He had already killed several men. Woodward's squad crept up, waited for the flash, then fired together. The sniper tumbled from the branches. They left him hanging upside down. Woodward's men showed no mercy. These tree shooters, these so-called frogs, had earned a special hatred. To the right of Rose Woods, 2 companies of the Bucktails, the 1st Pennsylvania Rifles, advanced into the gully near Devil's Den. Captain Frank Bell urged his men forward with short, sharp commands. They carried Sharp's rifles, breech loaders that gave them an edge. From their cover behind boulders and brush, they fired rapidly. Confederate return fire was fierce, but less accurate. Lieutenant John Bard watched as the Bucktails drove back the enemy skirmishers. He had never seen such precision. Whenever a rebel showed a sliver of skin, he later wrote, he was hit. Bell's men held the ground until the Confederates counterattacked. Outnumbered, they withdrew, slipping back across the gully under fire, but they had bloodied the enemy. Elsewhere on Little Round Top, the situation worsened. Confederate sharpshooters pinned down Union artillery crews. One by one, officers fell. General Stephen Weed and Lieutenant Charles Hazlett were both killed by rifle fire. Sergeant D. Porter Marshall of the 155th Pennsylvania wrote, "The enemy's sharpshooters ruled the morning. You couldn't lift your head without risking death." Captain Jeremiah Sample of the 139th Pennsylvania moved forward with his men near the wheat field. A single shot from the trees dropped him. He never got up. Private Samuel Schroyer, crouched behind the stone wall, turned his head to speak to the man beside him. That man, too, was dead. A bullet had found him moments earlier. In the chaos, Captain Woodward's tactics spread. Pairs of soldiers moved through the trees, baiting fire, flanking the hidden enemy. The fighting grew personal. There were no masses, no banners, no flags, only motion, shadow, and rifle smoke. Back in the gully, Captain Bell reorganized his men. They were dirty, bleeding, and low on ammunition. But they were alive, and Devil's Den, though not yet silent, was growing quieter. By afternoon, the sharpshooters on both sides had slowed their fire. Bodies lay among the rocks. Smoke drifted over the ridges. Captain Woodward climbed a boulder to scan the field. He saw no movement, only the haze of gunpowder and the scattered dead. The day was not over, but in the rocks and trees around Devil's Den, the sharpshooters had already done their work, and the echoes of their rifles still lingered in the stone. Chapter 5. Twilight at the Angle. The cannons roared to life just past 1 o'clock. For nearly 2 hours, 150 Confederate guns pounded the Union Center on Cemetery Ridge. Trees splintered, earth heaved, men crouched behind stone walls, unable to hear, unable to think. But the sharpshooters, the ones who had spent the morning fighting from fence lines and shallow pits, did not stop. Lieutenant Luke Bicknell of the 1st Massachusetts Sharpshooters held his position along a knoll just north of Ziegler's Grove. His 20-man detachment had crept forward hours earlier, crossing the orchard and digging in behind a narrow ridge. From there, they could see the Confederate line and the artillery that dotted it. While shells burst overhead, Bicknell's men did not flinch. Their target was not the thunder of batteries, but the men loading them. With calm precision, they picked off gunners as they appeared behind their caissons. Farther south, Private Eli Willard of the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters moved among the boulders near Plum Run. He carried a 30-pound telescopic target rifle, a tool he had learned to wield with unflinching skill. "I guess now I'll find that fellow," he said as he took a pair of field glasses from a nearby officer. Within moments, he had spotted a Confederate sniper high in a tree near the Emmitsburg Road. Willard crawled forward, set his scope, and fired. The enemy tumbled from the branches. Willard did not stop. For the rest of the afternoon, he remained at his post, firing round after round, his eye never leaving the scope. By nightfall, he had fired over 100 shots. As Pickett's charge began, the sharpshooters held their fire. The great assault unfolded before them. Gray lines marched across the field, flags raised high, officers shouting. The air filled with cannon smoke and rifle fire. But when it ended, when the Confederates broke and ran, when the field was covered in fallen men and abandoned muskets, the sharpshooters returned to their work. Confederate batteries under Colonel Henry Cabell had taken position near the Rogers farm. They opened fire again, hoping to cover the retreat. General David Birney saw the threat and called for the sharpshooters. 40 men from the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters answered the call. They crossed the field under fire, dropped to the ground before reaching canister range, and began crawling through the high grass. Captain Abraham Wright led the group. They spread out in a loose line, each man selecting a target. Their fire was steady, deliberate. Within minutes, the Confederate guns fell silent. Sergeant William Proctor later recalled, "We hit every horse they had. When they tried to fire again, they did it once, then ran." Lieutenant C.W. Moats of the troop artillery remembered it differently. He claimed they withdrew by choice. But Confederate reports admitted to chaos. Horses down, caissons abandoned, men fleeing under heavy fire. As Cabell's men dragged off their remaining guns by hand, Colonel Horatio Rogers of the 2nd Rhode Island was ordered forward. His regiment crossed the wreckage of Pickett's charge and advanced to the Emmitsburg Road. Lieutenant Elisha Hunt Rhodes wrote in his diary, "What a scene it was. Oh, the dead and dying. It was impossible to walk without stepping on bodies." Once at the road, Rogers's men came under immediate fire. Confederate skirmishers from the 61st Virginia were still active beyond a cornfield. From behind a post and board fence, they fired into the Rhode Islanders, killing one and wounding several. Rogers's men took cover in a sunken section of the road and returned fire. They would remain there through the night and into the morning. Farther north, the 15th Massachusetts and remnants of the 1st Massachusetts Sharpshooters pushed west of the road, past the copse of trees, into the open ground. Bicknell ordered his men to conserve ammunition. One by one, as their cartridges ran dry, they crawled back to the grove. Bicknell remained alone, still watching, still listening. He tried to reach his other detachments, but was met with sharp enemy fire. He retreated, unseen, under cover of dusk. By twilight, the field was scattered with small clusters of Union sharpshooters. They watched. They fired. And in the distance, the last of the Confederate guns slipped away under the cover of darkness. The battle was over. But the war of shadows, the work of the sharpshooter, was not. Chapter 6. Nightfall and Reckoning. The field had fallen quiet, but not with peace. As the sun slipped behind the ridges west of Gettysburg, a low mist began to rise over the blood-soaked wheat fields and shattered fences. The great roar of Pickett's charge had ended. Now came the small sounds, the cries of the wounded, the rustle of grass, the sharp, sporadic crack of rifles. Private Norman Eldred of the 111th New York lay prone behind a tangle of rails along the Emmitsburg Road. The air was still thick with powder. Smoke lingered in the hollows. Though the main attack had ended hours ago, the skirmishers remained. Eldred hated this duty. He had seen enough death for one day. Yet here he was, sent forward with the pickets to hold the line against an enemy that refused to vanish. Rebel sharpshooters remained in pockets across the field, firing at any Union movement. From his left came the voice of a soldier, Private Archibald McAfee from Company A. "Stop shooting," McAfee snapped. "You're bringing fire on all of us." Eldred glanced at him but said nothing at first. He reloaded, aimed, and fired again. McAfee's voice rose. "Stop it! Let them fire if they want. You'll get us both killed." Eldred turned toward him. "What do you think I should do? Let them hit me without reply?" "I swear," McAfee muttered. "You fire again, and I'll fix you myself." Eldred stared, then reached for a second rifle, one left by a wounded man. He tested the barrel, found it clear, and loaded both weapons. Then he fired once more into the shadows. He had just turned to face McAfee when the sharp crack of a Confederate rifle rang out. McAfee jerked backward, a clean shot to the temple. He collapsed instantly, face turned skyward. Eldred did not move. He had seen enough to understand how fast a man's life could vanish. He whispered nothing. He offered no prayer. He simply stayed low. Elsewhere across the field, the work of the sharpshooters continued. On the far left near Plum Run, Private Eli Willard of the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters remained behind a boulder. The light was fading fast, but he had no intention of moving. He could still see the flash of a Confederate rifle in the brush beyond the farm. He had marked the spot earlier and waited for one last clean shot. To the north, Colonel Horatio Rogers in the 2nd Rhode Island remained dug in along the sunken road. The Confederates had not pushed again, but sporadic fire kept them alert. The road, so recently a place of open slaughter, was now a narrow trench of mud, blood, and silence. And beyond them all, the dead lay thick. In the dark, skirmishers crawled among the fallen. Some checked bodies for signs of life. Others listened to groans carried on the wind. A soldier from the 14th Connecticut later recalled the sound. The night was still and dark. I could hear the wounded calling for water halfway across the field. Back near the stone wall at the center, men from the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters crept through the grass, their eyes trained on the last Confederate holdouts. With each shot, another silence followed, not because the enemy was gone, but because both sides had grown tired. By midnight, the picket lines on both sides had settled into an uneasy rhythm. One man would fire, another would wait, then a reply. Back and forth into the early hours of Independence Day. When morning came, the battlefield was still. The enemy had withdrawn under cover of darkness. The sharpshooters rose from their positions and surveyed the ground. The wheat fields were flattened. The Bliss Farm lay in ash. The rocks of Devil's Den were stained with powder, but it was the faces that haunted them. Some eyes were open, some mouths frozen mid-breath. Many were unmarked, but dead just the same. Private Norman Eldred stood and looked toward the road. He saw McAfee's body still lying where it had fallen. No one had moved it. No one had dared. He whispered nothing. Just turned, rifle in hand, and walked back toward his line. The sharpshooters had done their job, quietly, precisely, relentlessly. Their names would never be carved in stone. Their battles were never sung in poems. But on that long day in July, in the spaces between the charges and the cannonades, they shaped the field, one trigger at a time,